For a long time, decongesting correctional facilities across the country has come up in conversations because many of these holding structures are overstretched with inmates beyond their original retention capacity. Presently, Nigeria has 253 custodial centers nationwide with a holding capacity of slightly above 50,000, but at the moment, over 75,000 people are being held in these facilities. This and several other reasons are why the Minister of Interior, Rauf Aregbesola, is seeking the release of at least 30% of inmates from custodial centers across the country. According to the minister, 70% of the 75,635, that's 51,541 of the inmates are awaiting trial. He also shared his concern on the fact that some of the inmates have no reason to remain in custody as they had waited for their day in court even longer than the punishment provided by law for the crimes they committed. Mr. Aregbesola says achieving these feats can only be made possible with cooperation from state governors, as many offenders are being held for contravening state laws. But joining us in the studio is Joke Aladesomi, Executive Director, Center for Legal Support and Inmate Rehabilitation. Good morning. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Right, from what you have witnessed or seen, what really is at the heart of the congestion of our prisons? Is it because the will of justice in this country grinds slowly?
All right, so I would say that the major causes for the congestion of the prisons is actually, you can't really point to one particular thing. Yeah. You have to look at it from the point of arrest down to the point of conviction. And by the time we look at the mode at which arrests are being made, the cases being taken to the magistrate court, and then from the magistrate court to the high court, there's a little bit of delay that happens in there. And of course, looking beyond that, we're also looking at the issue of legal representation, a lot of them not having the financial ability to be able to get lawyers that would represent them in court. And of course, the delays in the court as well, the delay in justice as well has contributed to the congestion of the prison.
That's why I said, is it because the will of justice in the country, in this part of the world, grinds slowly? Right. Let's also look at some other matters now, talking about all of the things that you have mentioned. When we want to have a holistic decongestion, should it just be about just letting some persons go? Or we have to look at critically at some of the things that you have mentioned to really address what we have? Because this is not the first time we have talked about decongestion prison facilities.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think I love the use of the word holistic, because we need to take a general approach to resolving the problem. And it goes beyond just having a mass release. The mass release is good. It's an emergency option that needs to be, used at a time like this, because there's just so much. Just like what you said earlier, the prison capacity is just like 50,000. It has over 75,000 persons now. So the mass release, it's something that needs to be considered, but we need to look beyond just mass release. We need to start looking at how to ensure that we don't find ourselves there again. Because if this mass release is gone and these 30% are being released, in no time, our correctional facilities are going to be congested again. So now we have to start looking at our laws. There's a provision in the Nigerian Correctional Service Act that talks about non-custodian measures. And the Minister of Interior has also talked about having a lot of petty offenders in the prison. For instance, you have people who are arrested for loitering, and when you give them shine, of course, when anybody is arrested for loitering, it's because they are financially incapable, and then they are being taken into custody, giving them a certain amount to pay, and they can't afford it. So they are left behind there. So we have to start looking at non-custodian measures where people who are charged for petty offenses can actually serve other punishments beyond just being remanded, beyond just being imprisoned. So we have to look at that. And also, it's also high time for our correctional facilities to start upping their games when it comes to rehabilitation. The facility is not just to hold. Personally, I feel the correctional facility is actually playing a very vital role when it comes to the criminal justice system. You have the opportunity to have these people in your facility for a number of years, like minimum of 3 years. You have people who are there for 3, for 5, for 10 years, And giving that opportunity for them to be better persons, for them to come out and be more positive and productive would be one of the good ways of decongesting the prison. And also, the world is beginning to talk about restorative justice, where you're not just looking at the offender, you're beginning to look at the victim as well. Is there a way the matters can be resolved without necessarily having to go to the court, you know, and then flood the court with the cases and all those things? There are times when the victim might not even want to go through the rigorous process of the court. They might probably want to prefer a fine. They might probably prefer, you know, just some sort of compensation than going through a long criminal trial that will yield nothing for them. So we have to join the world's conversation as regards restorative justice. We have to join the world's conversation as regards rehabilitation of these incarcerated individuals.
It seems to us that going to the issue of restorative justice is almost fanciful. Because in the first place, what it seems here is that it's not the criminal that has committed the crime.
Yeah.
That the state has now committed the crime against the criminal. So we have criminal at one stage, and then the state as the criminal. Because if you're supposed to be in jail for maybe 2 years and you have been there for 10 years, who is the criminal? It's the state.
Yes.
The state has now become the criminal. So how do you now free the criminal from the criminal?
That's the question, because really, if, for instance, if you're arresting somebody who is supposed to, and the sentence for the offense is just like 6 months, and the person has to be there for 1 year, of course the government is not guilty of holding them, because and the thing is, the facilities are bound to hold until there's a judgment or a ruling directing them to release. So if there is no ruling like that, they will keep holding.
Do we have any arrangement where eventually this person can also now seek redress for overpunishment? Is it possible?
You know,
I know you guys should take that, because if I'm supposed to serve 10 years and I serve 15 years, you stole 5 years of my. You know, there's one book called In Search of Lost Time, which says that when time is lost, they wrote about 7 novels analyzing this search of lost time, looking at the past and how the past, is difficult for you to get it back. There have been cases like that in the U.S. where people were wrongly profiled, and especially black people who were in jail for maybe 10, 20 years. And they discovered after technology came to the rescue that they were not the criminal. And they have been given compensation. They gave them compensation in money. But money can never buy the joys that you have gotten all those and the time.
And time that is lost.
Well, is government thinking along that line? Is even the civil society, are you guys thinking about that part? Because when you're talking about restorative justice is not always possible, but there has to be an attempt to do that. They may not be, you may not be able to pay, but there has to be an accounting.
True. Really, I think the issue of compensation is what we are beginning to, like civil society organizations are beginning to really talk about. But the truth is, by the time we look at the population and people who have had to face these consequences, I'm not even sure the government can meet up. Like, for instance, there was something I shared with some group of people, that the consequences of incarceration does not know the innocent. So as far as you're arrested and you're kept behind bars or you're kept in the correctional facilities, whether you're eventually discharged and acquitted after 10 years, the effect of that 10 years, you have to suffer it. For instance, there's one of our beneficiaries who was discharged and acquitted after 4 years in April. And from April, for a period of 12 months, he was sleeping in one classroom. He doesn't even have a house to go to. This is somebody who has his life going for him prior to being incarcerated. So really, we're getting to that stage where we're saying somebody needs to be held accountable. You can't just keep, people wasting their lives away. And these are young people. As a matter of fact, the population, the age statistics of those in prison are majorly between the age of 18 and 45. So these are young men. Vital years. These are young men who still have a lot of their years ahead of them. These are young men who can still contribute significantly to the.
So if you commit crime against the state, you pay for it. If the state commits crimes against you, you pay for it.
Sadly, really.
But are we having that conversation such that we can get some form of compensation that you have rightly pointed at this point? What is the sense you are getting? Is the state looking to toe this path?
Well, I think the conversation is just beginning to kick up now. A lot of persons have actually gotten compensation, especially when it's an issue of breach, the fundamental human right breach. You've had people who have gotten compensation, but I can tell you that even in situations like that where there are judgments, getting the government to even pay you compensation, getting the judgment is one thing. Having the government to obey it is another issue you need to deal with. So starting the conversation alone might not even get us to the point. But well, maybe it's going to get the government to start to sit up in terms of our justice delivery system, and to start being more proactive, in trying to resolve these significant issues that plague our justice system.
We call it penitentiary. I mean, the US people used to call it penitentiary.
Yeah.
From the word penitent, because it brought a kind of pious shadow over it, that the whole idea of holding somebody in detention is not necessarily to punish the person, but to make the person into a moral agent, to make the person change and become better. But what is happening is actually that the person who is trying to change you has become more criminal than you are. So now, what do you guys really experience in terms of the moral condition in which these people are? Because we know that a lot of crimes are still committed in it. They deprive them of their right food.
Yeah.
They put them in conditions where they could not do, where it could not. You don't want any human being to be in. They don't have enough space. They don't have enough ventilation. They don't have enough sun. They don't get the right medical treatment.
Yeah.
If you have high blood pressure, God save you. You don't even have the facility to measure blood pressure or sugar, or your blood sugar, or if you're having heart problems, you don't have conditions to do. I remember when I was Secretary General of a Committee for Defense of Human Rights under may so rest in peace, Bekora Kuti in the 90s. I followed him to Benin to go and look at the conditions. It was terrible. There was one time I went to one in Lagos. The other time, a friend of mine, a police officer, that time, one of these, when I got there, the way the officers were treating the inmates, especially the female inmates, it was so disgusting. And I was like, why are you guys doing this? These are human beings. Why are you talking to them as if they committed crimes? They're supposed to serve their crimes. You don't need to worsen the situation there by rough handling them and using expletives against them and so on. Even though you keep them in that kind of situation, are there mechanisms for punishing people who maltreat inmates? And so, because the moral condition of inmates are very important.
Thank you very much. One of the reasons why I started my organization is actually because of this question you just asked me. I've had the opportunity of being in this space for quite a while and represented a lot of the accused persons. And I discovered that there's this misconception that what the incarcerated individuals really need is just freedom. There's just this misconception that all they need is just bring them out of the prison. Nobody's talking about what's their life like, behind bars. What's their life like when they come out? What's actually their struggles? How can we? Because the truth remains that until we start looking at these three phases of while they are incarcerated, their release, and post-release, what happens to their lives, we might not be able to solve effectively the problem that plagues our criminal justice system.
Right.
There is just this, when you bring them out, just provide legal support for them and bring them out of the prison. But a lot of them are going through a lot. By the time you're looking at a population of 75,000 persons, there is no way the health status is going to be sound. There is no way. There is no way the feeding is going to be sound. There is no way the rehabilitation is going to be sound. There is no way. So we need to start looking at effective ways of actually decongesting. And that starts by, one, just like what you mentioned, looking at how to, to hop the moral values behind bars, to look at the rehabilitation measures there. What happens? What do they learn? What are the things that are placed? And I'm not talking about half-baked rehabilitation. I'm not talking about, they're allowed to write exams, but you do not even give them teachers. They do not even have access to books. They do not even have access to pen. So it looks like there's just this government is beginning to leave it totally to CSOs, to just or to religious organization to make provisions for all of these things. But if you're very familiar with that sector, you will know that it's a very enclosed community. There's a limit to what you can do. So there has to be effective, deliberate and effective rehabilitation where they have access to most of these things that would help them to become better person. There was an interview I had some days ago, and one of the messages we received was that somebody was talking about the uncle who was in prison in Scotland, and while he was there, he learned tailoring, and while he was in prison, he trained her that was housed to become what she is today. He's housed and is doing very well in terms of the fashion industry. That's a system that has looked at how can we make these lives better? Because if you're not looking at how to make them better, they come out, some go in innocent, and they come out more hardened. At the end of because the day. By the time they come out, somebody...
Was it Derie or one of these politicians who was released recently?
Presidential pardon. He got, I think Joshua
Derie.
Yes.
Who complained about the conditions of the jail. If he himself at that level complained about the conditions.
Yeah, with his status.
With his status. You can imagine what it is. Remember that Ganifa traced his problem, his health problem. So when he was locked up in Gasho, in the north. And Yaradua, the late Yaradua also died not the president, the presidential candidate, the general, also died because of his condition of the jail. I mean, among other things, When you look at, and I as a reporter in the US, I spent a night trying to see how the jail condition was. You haven't seen the one in Nigeria. The one in the US was like luxury. It's like being you're enjoying yourself. As bad as it was, because I was supposed to, the newspaper was doing a report on the condition of the jail, how they were. Different people went to different jails. So I was here in this one overnight. I had dinner with them. I talked to them. And so on. These criminals, they're criminals actually. You know they are criminals, but they don't have any arms. They can't do anything because they're armed cops all over the place.
But saying they're criminals might not be the best word, though. Saying they're criminals might not be the best word, because there are a lot of them there who are eventually discharged and acquitted. So using the word criminal.
No, these ones have been jailed.
Oh, they've
been jailed by the law.
They've been convicted.
Yes, these people have been convicted. They don't spend. They're not. Their situation is not like us, where you just leave people abandoned in jail for a long time. There will be people who will pay for it. Who will pay for it. How do we move from that situation, from our situation to that kind level? Of situation?
I think it's a journey. We are actually at that point now where we're beginning to take that step. We're beginning to, draw the attention of the government to what they can do beyond just holding these people. Well, we need to emphasize on the importance of rehabilitation. We're beginning to emphasize on the importance of the welfare, because there is if you allow me, there's this particular case I would really love to refer to.
Go ahead.
And I can remember when we came into the matter, it was so bold. He was telling us about the evidence he's going to make available to us, the document that is so sure that he's innocent. And that matter went on for like 4 years without anything happening in the case. And there was a particular day we got to court, and I discovered that it was just unnecessarily quiet. I was driving home that day, and I was like, this guy, something is wrong with him. Like, I can't really tell what it is, but I know something is wrong with him. In less than a week, we heard that he died within the correctional facility. This is somebody who was ready to emphasize on his innocence. And of course, there is no way, just like what I said, when there is overpopulation, a lot of things is definitely going to go wrong. And it's interesting to know that the Minister of Interior is beginning to see this himself, and that's why he's making the mass release. But the mass release cannot be. It's not enough. It's not enough. It cannot be. It cannot be an option that would always be considered, because it will get to a point that even the public will be uncomfortable. Right. If we're looking at 30% of 75,000, that's almost like 21,000 plus. So it will get to a point where the society is uncomfortable with it. So we have to go beyond just saying, okay, there's going to be mass release now might be a good idea, because our prisons are extremely congested, right? But we have to start looking beyond that, putting in proper measures.
It looks like there's a story that I don't think our prisons are as good as it used to be at the time, at one time, when I heard the story of somebody, it was around the Southwest, who had committed a crime, and they were trying to adjudicate the matter, and the person was saying, please, be fast with this judgment, so I can. The next meal is rice and dodo. So I don't want to miss that rice and dodo this afternoon. So please finish your judgment in time so I can go and eat that rice. I don't think even the criminal has that luxury these days.
Obviously,
because there's no rice and dodo. There's no even space for you to sit down and eat your rice and dodo.
Yeah, it's just the same thing when you hear our parents telling us, oh, the university used to be a lot better.
Yeah.
You have like your rooms are comfortable. Then the crime rate was not this high. Right now, survival for an average Nigerian is even tough. So the crime rate is on the rise, and that's why the so it's a whole.
There's also the constitutional aspect where it is said that prisons are on the exclusive list, and that perhaps state governments should begin to be involved to addressing these matters. Let's talk from that point of view.
Oh yes, like that's one of the things that would bring the change that we really want to see, because the federal government has a lot to handle. We just talked about the total number of these facilities being 253. That's a lot on the shoulders of the federal government. And the truth remains that by the time, for instance, in the United States, correctional facilities are privatized. You have individuals who are heading it, and they're even making money from it. At that point, they will start seeing that you have manpower within the prison. They'll start thinking of having facilities that can help with building their skills. They'll start thinking of ways of ensuring that those facilities are yielding profits, But before we even get there, let's even talk about the states handling these aspects, handling the correctional facilities, being on their own list of watching it. Yes, the concurrent list. Thank you, of watching it and ensuring that things are gone and they are being directed by the state government. When that happens,
that the state government want to take up this responsibility, looking at their attitude towards the other punishments with regards to perhaps death sentence and all of that, do you think they want to take up this responsibility?
If they restrict their ideas to just the issue of death penalty and all of that, then they might be reluctant. But I just talked about how prisons, I read a report that shows that the correctional facilities in the US contribute more than 20% to the GDP. When the state government is beginning to see from that perspective, I think they should jump at the option. I think it's something that needs to be considered, because when they are seeing that, just like I mentioned earlier, having young men, able, strong men of 18 to 45, you would agree with me that if there are industries in there, if there are facilities of production facilities of such in the correctional facilities, and they are making money, the state governments we jump at it. So when they are looking at it from the point of burden, of course they would want to withdraw, but they need to look beyond just issues relating to death penalty.
There have been people who have turned out bestsellers from even living in jail. There was a novelist, I've forgotten his name now, who told everybody the story of a novel was going to write. So everybody was remembering it. This is the story of, I just got in mind. You take this part of the story, remember this part of the story. When they got out of jail, all of them remembered this whole part of the story. And they wrote everything down, and it became a great novel. Now, this is the kind of thing that you need. You talk about the mills, you're talking about the mills of justice. Even Harry Longfellow, the poet, said the mills of God grind slowly, but they grind exceeding small. But we are getting smaller in mind rather than smaller rather than become bigger in justice. How do we become bigger in justice?
Right.
How do we make the atmosphere even clean for them to live in? They live in fecal environments, and then they have to eat there too. We are talking about flood and cholera. We are also doing the same thing.
Yeah, it's just the reality of what it is.
Is it policy that can do it? Is it budget that will do it? Is it a meeting that will do it? Is it the law? What is it that we need to do to get this thing moving?
Okay, before you respond, let's quickly go on a commercial break. When we return, we'll continue the conversation with you. Stay with us. All right, what goes on behind the studio? Interesting one. But before we went on the break, we were talking about our correctional centers and the call for decongestion of the prisons. And we still have in the studio Joke Aladesomi, Executive Director, Center for Legal Support and Inmate Rehabilitation. And before we went on the break, Sam asked the question with regards to how we can address this holistically. Is it by the laws, policies? What measures should be taken to addressing it?
Yeah, and I would say that in terms of policies, in terms of laws, we have these things. The Nigerian Correctional Service Act of 2019 was actually more encompassing. Like, they tried to address each and every challenges that plague this sector. So the laws are there. I think we just have to be deliberate in terms of implementing the laws.
Well, you were saying well, we're off air that even during COVID, they had to ask people to get. So it was better for you to be sick than to be criminal. So they were saved by COVID.
Yeah, I think the number went down drastically during COVID, and it was a worldwide thing. Even developed countries where there was mass release, like because of COVID. Of course, nobody could understand the extent of the pandemic and what was going to happen. And of course, the facilities, it's the number one. We're like top on the list.
It's like I'm a criminal, but I'm not as bad as COVID.
Oh, yeah. so COVID really, there was a part of the Correctional Service Act where you mentioned,
yes,
that's the
if it gets to a particular number, the state commandant or something, the state controller rather, can say that, you know what, we are rejecting these persons. But we are not seeing that happen except for the COVID period that you mentioned.
Yes, COVID, of course, during COVID period, they will tell you if you don't have a COVID test and it's not negative, we can't let you in. As in, that was really happening. But now, post-COVID, it's not possible for the courts to order that somebody be remanded in a particular
saved by
prison.
the disease.
Yeah, saved by the disease. And then remanded in a particular prison, and then you get there and you say, no, it's so the actualization of that provision, I'm not sure is at that point where it should be. Like, post-COVID, I'm not sure I've seen it personally, where they would say, the prison is... Right now, if you go around the correctional facilities in Lagos State, they are far more than their capacity, far much more than their capacity. So the laws are there, the policies are there, all these ideas and CSO's recommendations are there.
The social circumstances in the prisons are different. People are more ruthless to each other.
Yeah.
I was thinking a song offline. When I was in primary school in Warri, we used to pass through one prison system. And sometimes we were hearing them, they used to call the place Okere College. I don't know why they call it Okere College. We heard them cutting grass and say, since the morning, we never chop, we never smoke, we got to go punish you with the Okere High College. They'll be using it as a song and they'll be walking with it and be cutting the grass with it. We don't even have that camaraderie, even they cannot even be happy as criminals together, you know?
But the funny thing is, even these days, it's you can hardly... I think a lot of us will have that mindset where you see them in blue cutting the grasses and all of that. But because of the security,
they can't even do that. They can use the cut. They use the cutlass and go to the water.
One key aspect I'd like for us to talk about is the aspect of their rehabilitation outside of the prisons. How it has been the experience, their integration into the society, the stigmatization. That's another aspect. Talk to us on that.
Okay, so the issue of reintegration actually starts from while they are incarcerated. So while they're incarcerated, you're looking at rehabilitation. Coming out, you're looking at reintegration, right? Because if they are not prepared, there is no way they can properly reintegrate. For instance, I gave an instance while we're off here that people who, if you're a fashion designer, for example now, and you're doing so well prior to arrest, and arrest and remand has nothing to do with you committed a crime or not. As long as somebody accused you of committing a crime, the court is bound to take your plea and remand. And for somebody who does not have the ability, the financial capacity to get legal representation, the person can be there for 5 years, and I'm not even exaggerating. And for somebody who is a fashion designer doing excellently well prior to arrest, and this person lands in prison, spends 4 years, spends 5 years, by the time you come out, fashion has moved.
Exactly.
You can't even remember your skills. You can't even remember you can't even find your clients. So post-incarceration challenges is actually very, very real. And we need to start paying attention. If indeed we want to decongest the prison, we need to start paying attention to it. Because controlling the number that goes in would help us to actually decongest the prison. But when we are not paying attention to it, would represent them, would speak English, would bring them out.
Right.
They come out, survival is hard, they don't have food to eat, they don't have work to do.
Go back to the
they go back to the because they have to survive. Sadly, it's just the reality of life.
But that is the irony too, that we are talking about rehabilitating people from Boko Haram, people who are bandits and all of that, and trying to integrate them into society. We are talking about plans for that. But we don't have plans for people. Those are people who created crimes against the state.
Yeah.
But these are people, these other people who committed crimes. Maybe they stole their car next door, or they slapped somebody on the streets and so on. And then those people, you made them more criminal in jail, and then they are coming back to the society even more bitter. And so I have no problem for them. It's a displacement of priorities.
Right.
Really, it's and we the government needs to start looking at the aspect of the system, the post-incarceration, addressing those challenges. You know, in developed countries, you are looking at safe houses where people who come out can stay pending when they. In Nigeria, there was a training I went for some months back, and I was surprised that they were beginning to talk about the lives, the wives of the incarcerated, the sons and daughters of the incarcerated. I'm like, where I'm coming from, we have not even finished conversation on the incarcerated, not to start talking about their families, not to start talking about the challenges, because the truth remains that they go through a lot. There's, I made mention of one of our beneficiaries who was incarcerated for almost 5 years before he was released. As at the time he went in, his child was just a month. So by the time the child came back, by the time he came out, the child was almost 5 years old. I can tell you from now, he has not even been able to spend 2 full days with his family. Why? Because he said the way he's looking, that he looks so tattered, that going back and showing people the way that he will be disgracing his wife. These are realities. These are challenges. These are people who they do not, if not because he came out and were able to assist him with, having jobs and then accommodation and all those things, there's no way he would have been able to get his life back. Because come to think of the issue of stigmatization as well. Nobody, if you ask any average Nigerian, if an ex-incarcerated person should come to your office and say they want to work, would you give them? But nobody's going to ask the question, were you discharged and acquitted, or were you convicted? All they know is this person was incarcerated. But if you start reading, if you check news, there's things that are happening in developed country, you're hearing that there's partnership with big organizations, big organizations where they go in and they are deliberate. If you look at countries who are doing well in terms of their justice system, it's because they have paid close attention to rehabilitation, and we need to find ourselves in that stage.
Absolutely, and that's a fine place to leave the conversation this morning. Joke Aladesomi, Executive Director, Center for Legal Support and Inmate Rehabilitation. Thank you for your time on the program.
Thank you so much. Thank you.